You are watching Cape Town TV, channel 263. This is Open Studio. I'm your host, Thabang Segaecho. Welcome to today's program. On today's show, I've got a special guest once again, Mr. Zain Paul, who's from Back to Work Union, which is a union that is representing those that are unemployed. It speaks about housing and that which pertains to housing. So today he's here to discuss specifically housing and how that actually works and where does the government come in. So at the end of the day, you actually tuned in to a very exciting program today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Zain Paul, thank you for joining us today again and welcome back.
Thank you very much.
Wonderful stuff. So I'm so excited to hear this because a lot of people, we know how the human settlement is actually going on in the country. So I think there's no better time than right now to be actually unpacking that a little bit.
Yes.
So I know that you're the chairperson of the organization. And what is adequate housing exactly and how important is it?
Adequate housing is defined by the United Nations, which informs the South African Constitution. Adequate housing is a livable space with enough living space, with a garden, schools, police stations, clinics, recreation facilities. So when we speak about adequate housing, we speak about all those elements to be part of the house.
Wonderful. So every single sphere of a wholesome livelihood with services being available, public services that you just mentioned,
Yes.
readily accessible for the general public. So would you say that housing within the country, especially in the Western Cape, is a problem? And why do you say that?
It's a problem because in our view, it's not adequate housing. If you look at the RDP house is 40 square meters. It's smaller than this studio. Yeah? There are no trees planted in the area. There are no parks in the area. There are very few services. And when we speak about adequate housing, the clinic must be there. The hospital must be there. The early childhood development areas must be. But also 40 square meters is not sufficient. If you look at your Delfts, your Khayelichas, people are always extending another room, putting it upstairs, whatever. We are proposing that government legislation must change from 40 square meters to 200 square meters so that you don't have to build an extra room. You don't have to have a Wendy house in the room. And that is what we are advocating, 200 square meters, which we call adequate housing.
That is so profound because, and they are catering for the African families, if I should put them specifically under the light, because they have a lot of children and more than, like you have like a whole lineage staying in one room. So I do understand that perspective where they need to consider the square meter in order to accommodate the entire family. So what is the difference then between social housing and adequate housing?
Social housing is the 40 square meters housing. Okay. It is just to build you a structure and your 20 family members must be there. Adequate housing is derived from the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights, the United Nations, the rights of the child, the United Nations socio-economic rights. And that speaks about adequate housing where you live like a in a first world country, not an RDP house. And that is where you have that quality of services, so your health, your physical health and your mental health improves.
100%. So you get the entire system pretty much covered, a conducive environment for a family to actually
That's
thrive.
correct, yes.
Where do you think the government is missing it in not achieving that?
The government is lacking in the terms that they don't want to spend money into housing. It's also where the government don't have that money and where the private sector, the white establishments, the white suburbs get all the services. So the government also has a challenge in providing that adequate housing. What the government is also pushing now is that breaking new ground programs, but also affordable housing. So if you have money, you can afford to go stay there. If you have a lot of money, you can go afford to stay in Camps Bay.
That's right.
But the majority of our people are unemployed, they cannot afford that type of housing.
Right. You mentioned United Declaration of Human Rights. What exactly is that?
The United Nations has developed a policy to say, when we have the United Declaration of human rights means adequate housing, adequate services, adequate health care, adequate safety and security. Now, adequate in a South African context doesn't mean that you must live in a slum, that you must live in a shack. So even the government, even the Constitution of South Africa doesn't ascribe to the issue of the human rights or Declaration of Human Rights.
That is so enlightening, because these are some of the things, especially our viewers and myself for that matter, don't actually know or not aware of. I believe that what your union stands for is quite important. So for somebody that's watching right now thinking, how can I best support that which you do? How can we do that as just an ordinary member of the community?
As a member, you need to raise those issues. The housing is too small. There are no services. There is no nutrition for the kids. The kids have to eat whatever they get. So it's a holistic, linked domino effect to actually have adequate housing, which brings about adequate community living.
Yes, and now, the government they would normally be saying, oh, well, we've been hit by COVID. Some of the resources had to be spent in different areas based on the fact that we were met by this unforeseen, pandemic that hit everybody. So what would you say to the government right now, saying that we just don't have enough money? Because, obviously we know that housing has always been a problem for decades on end. What would you say?
Nationalize the banks, nationalize the mines, nationalize all the supermarkets. The banks as a collective have just sitting in the bank $14 billion just sitting there. Now, in our view, $14 billion can sort out all the shacks, can sort out all the RDP houses, and provide each family with an adequate house.
So you're basically saying there is funds available to actually afford the community members like immediate help.
That's correct.
All right, when we come back, we'll continue the conversation. Don't go away. Welcome back. If you just tuned in, this is Open Studio, Channel 263, Cape Town TV, and I'm your host, Thabang Segaecho. Again, Open Studio is a platform that's open to the general public to come on and discuss that which they're involved in terms of community work, outreaches, or programs. And if you'd like to be part of the show, please drop us an email at junaid@capetowntv.org. But earlier on, we're in conversation with Mr. Zain Paul, who is here to actually discuss and educate us quite a bit on matters concerning housing and unemployment. But today we're talking about housing, and you're from Back to Work.
That's correct.
And he is actually the chairperson of the organization. And I wanted to ask you, Mr. Paul, what exactly are the United Nations guidelines in terms of this housing, and what should we be actually aware of?
Article 25 of the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights specifically sets out the size of the house, the size of the property, what must be in the house, what must be in the property, what must be on the pavement, what must be in the community. Article 11 of the International Convention on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights says, so I must be able to practice my religion, I must be able to practice my job in this space. And we see that it's not happening in our communities. International Convention of Political and Human Rights says, I must have adequate health care. I must have adequate, and when I speak about health care, it is mental health and physical health. Mm-hmm. There are hardly any facilities for mental health patients, So the Constitution, our Constitution, Section 26, derives all their information from the United Nations. But we can see the RDP house is not conforming to their declaration. And the big problem is the government doesn't have money, but the private sector, they have a lot of money. And why isn't government forcing them to build houses, adequate housing for our people?
So you are saying that there is a role actually or an opportunity where the private sector could merge with government and together try and look for a workable alternative in servicing the community.
We are not about a workable solution. We are about nationalizing all the wealth. Because
distributing.
And the Freedom Charter says the wealth belongs to all the people in South Africa. So why is it in white hands the whole time, you know? And we find that the government, and especially the ANC government, for 25 years have been inadequate in trying to address that problem. But I think communities must stand up to demand adequate housing.
100%. And let's talk about our elderly residents, right? We understand that some of them do have old age homes and shelters, etc. How do you think adequate alternative housing can be provided for them?
So our elderly, they live in hostels or in shelters, and that is still about apartheid social planning.
Okay.
The elderly must get into that adequate housing frame because that will assist in their mental health. It will assist in their physical health. It will make, and in fact, they will live actually longer, you know, if they have in a better space. These homes and welfare centers are like prisons. And we were not made to live in a prison.
That is so true. Which brings me to the next point. International Convention on Civil and Political Rights. What does that actually mean? Could you just unpack that for us a little bit?
That is the United Nations declaration in terms of civil and political rights. Now, civil rights is, do I have access to water? Do I have access to electricity? Do I have access to sewerage? Do I have access to a safe environment? The political is when I can vote, but my vote brings about change.
That's right.
And we can see in the South African context, when I'm
no, the opposite actually
it's
happens.
the opposite, you know. But it's also where communities are not complaining. You know, we live in communities. If the street flows with sewage, we don't complain. But it's also to engage our communities to become active in the area. If you look at the area like Delft, there are hardly any trees. And trees have a calming effect on the community.
They're wonderful for the environment.
Yes. Yeah. And it also assists with the global warming and the climate change.
Yes.
But this type of housing is just dumping our people into our Delfts, our Khayelichas, and just leaving us there.
100%. And where is your stance in terms of economic, social, and cultural rights? But if you could just also explain that for us too.
So the social is derived from the adequate housing. The cultural is designed for your community halls, your community places where the arts can be expressed, like your dancing, your rapping, your plays, your theatre.
Sports, etc.
Sports, etc. So that is where the cultural comes in. But it's derived from the adequate housing. So adequate housing must first start, and then all the other things will happen. The political rights it's not just about making a cross. The political sphere must also change. Our councillors, they have a term of 5 years, and that's a very long time. And if they don't spend the money in that area, we just stay the same. So the political system must also change. The Constitutional Court now recently said that independent members of parliament can be elected. That's a step in the right direction.
I agree.
The other problem is also where the wealth of the country is not being spent in our areas. It's not being spent in Khayelitsha or Langa or Lingulethu. It's a dump, you know. So we are saying Grassy Park must look like the gardens.
You're looking for the equilibrium. There has to be balance.
It has
all
to be
right?
balanced, yes.
I mean, that is understandable because really we are all here voting for the government, right, to give us equal service delivery. And that was the whole point of it. And when we come back, I just want to speak a little bit more to Mr. Zain Paul on evictions and how that process actually works. When we come back, don't go away. You're tuned in Open Studio. This is Cape Town TV, channel 263. We are so glad that you could join us today. I'm here with Mr. Zain Paul, who's actually the chairperson of Back to Work, which is an organization that is representing community members who are actually in situations rather of unemployment or that of lack of housing, etc. So it is an organization that is, you can actually become a member of should you choose to. But right now we're actually on the topic about evictions and how that process actually works, because it's quite a grayed out area. It's almost like certain laws apply to certain people under certain circumstances. Won't you just clear that up for us a little bit?
So if I can use the example of Woodstock, you know, they talk about gentrification, where the residents who've been living there for 30, 40 years are kicked out, and you get these new yuppies who want to move in, and they make the place modern. They bring in services, but you pay so much. Evictions is a big problem because it only affects non-white people, you know. Evictions also deals with cutting off your water, cutting off your electricity, not giving you any services. The problem is that the majority of colored people in the Western Cape voted for the DA. So the colored people are to blame for these evictions indirectly. We are saying no to evictions. We are saying no to water cuts and electricity. We're saying free water, free electricity, and there must be a moratorium on evictions because our people are unemployed mostly, and you cannot evict a person if they're unemployed.
Right, so that's where I actually want to sit on a little bit, because we're not sure at what point is one, you know, what does the landlord have the right or a stance to say that I'm going to evict you? So what is the actual lawful, correct procedure? At what point is it legal for one to be evicted? You just mentioned that they cannot be evicted when they're unemployed.
So the landlord, if he wants to evict you, must serve you with a notice, which he gets from the court or from his lawyer. When you receive that notice, you must oppose it. And there are NGOs like Reclaim the City who can assist you with those opposing affidavits. Then you must tell the landlord why you cannot be evicted.
Okay.
Right? But it's all in that court papers. And I would encourage people who are facing eviction to contact Reclaim the City to have that eviction postponed or even cancelled.
Okay, so they can contest it relatively.
They can contest it, yes.
Okay, that's great to hear. So I want to talk a little bit more about the architectural side of things. Spatial planning of housing, what is that?
So the city of Cape Town decides, in order to build, to give people houses, we need to put them in Delft. We need to put them in Blikkiesdorp. We need to put them in Sightsee in Khayelitsha. And that is, spatial planning is a racist token, where black people are put far away from town, whereas white people can afford to live within town. And even in the Western Cape is where the DA is exercising spatial apartheid planning. They don't want to build RDP houses or adequate houses in your Constantius or your Camps Bay. Imagine if I had a house in Camps Bay.
Right.
You know? So that is the problem with the spatial racist planning of housing.
So you're basically saying they are using structural, geographical demarcations to racially separate or segregate
Yes.
different classes and different races.
Yes. They're continuing the apartheid segregation laws.
Right. And how do you think the disadvantaged communities who are on the receiving end of this, which you just mentioned, what do you think the government, or do you think they could actually stand for themselves and say, we're not accepting this anymore, so that they can see the change actually take place?
So we have an organization called the Progressive Socialists. They are just claiming land.
Okay.
We have a lot of people that are occupying the Cape Peninsula with technology, the land. So we must claim that land.
All right, so you're all about go there and just do your thing, make your presence felt.
Yes.
Wonderful. So for somebody that's watching right now thinking, oh, wow, they can relate, or maybe they're even in a situation, that we've just mentioned now about housing, how do we get a hold of your organization?
So we've got the Samu Back to Work campaign Facebook page, and they can get us on Facebook.
As well. Okay, is membership free or?
Membership is free.
Okay, great. So viewers at home, you are welcome to join Back to Work and then be a part of supporting this campaign, because really they are being the voice to the voiceless. And what would you say, though, are the necessary steps that the government needs to take right now in terms of addressing the issue that you just mentioned?
The government must nationalize the banks, the mines, the retail shops, even the cell phone companies, nationalize them, and that money would be able to assist in the issue of adequate housing, cultural and political rights.
For somebody who's watching right now who doesn't understand what nationalism actually is and how does it work, won't you just explain that for us?
So the government must take ownership of the mines, ownership of the banks.
All right, so currently the parastatals are still there, right? So you're saying that they should completely own everything. So that people are able to get access onto it. Are you currently running any specific campaigns to do with certain burning issues that assist our communities?
We busy with where the city has now put out a press statement to say this is how they're going to change the water issue. So there's going to be more cutoffs of water, more evictions. So from now until the 3rd, we're working on the issue of free water. And free water doesn't mean the 6 kiloliters that they want to give you. We're saying free water means in excess of 350 kiloliters. So you can have a 5-hour shower or something like that. So that is what we are busy with. The city also wants the due date by the 3rd, so they put out for comment, and then you have a little space of time to comment. But that's what we are doing.
All right. So you are currently running the water campaign, and in terms of electricity, especially in the Western Cape, are they getting off the grid? Where are they actually at this point?
So the issue with electricity, the city of Cape Town get a lot of their electricity from Eskom.
Right.
And the city don't have to have blackouts because they have 2 power stations which can lift that benefit. But the issue is also free electricity, and they cut off a lot of people, and we're saying that electricity must be free.
Electricity and water must be free.
Must be
so
free.
Says Mr. Zain Paul from Back to Work. And unfortunately, we've come to the end of our show. Mr. Zain Paul, thanks once more
Thank you very much
for coming through to the studio.
Thank you very much.
It was great hosting you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to our viewers at home. We'll see you again, same place, same time. I'm your host, Thabang Segaecho, signing out from Open Studio. This is Cape Town TV, channel 263. Thank you for watching.